afternoon, and thank you so much for taking out time from what has been obviously a very busy day today from the RSVPs that we've got. But thank you very much for coming. I see a few men here, past presidents or president of YFlow, members of YFlow and AIP, and our friends, of course. It really does feel wonderful for us to be able to finally kickstart this conversation amongst us. Just to give you a bird's eye view on the numbers, and this is something I was discussing with Divya just this morning, that the impact investment sector is projected to exceed $1 trillion in 2022 and is forecasted to double by 2030. So even from a business standpoint, it makes all the sense to be in this space. As we move towards realizing India's Sentinel vision for 2047, we cannot ignore the large-scale challenges that must be addressed. Moreover, our role in finding solution to these problems is a subject that we are just starting to grapple with. For those of you who are familiar with Professor C.K. Prahlad and his bottom of the pyramid theory, as described in his book, The Fortune at the Bottom of the Pyramid, it ignited a worldwide discussion about the responsibility of companies in tackling poverty. However, it's often the case that when certain issues gain prominence, others may be neglected. So does our nation still seek to combat only poverty with basic needs of food, clothing, and shelter? Or have we also shifted to include creating solutions that promote inclusion and diversity across gender, ethnicity, disability, caste, and religion? I think that's a question we need to ask ourselves. There is an hourglass problem when it comes to solving social problems today. On one end of the hourglass are lots of ideas on what can be done by the government, by markets. And on the other end are the actual decision makers who demonstrate deep openness and curiosity to newer ideas and solutions. Some of those are here with us today. This dialogue is merely the beginning of our planned, systematic approach to emphasize inclusive partnerships that foster a profound comprehension of real-life experiences. We are optimistic that if we can accomplish two objectives only today, we will have made significant progress. Number one, can we debunk some misconceptions about philanthropy and the modern approach to it? Secondly, are there specific sectors or fields where our community of budding female leaders would like to double-click on so that it sets the path for our next set of roundtables that we have planned on doing in the coming months, that as a next step to this event? I welcome all of you to be very participative and inclusive during this discussion. And as I welcome Amitabh Jaipuria, CEO of Accelerate India Philanthropy, onto stage, I'd like to introduce him as somebody who's had 35 years of experience as a seasoned business leader, something I just learned earlier today, across diverse sectors. And he's also been very actively involved with SVP. And for a more detailed introduction, I'm sure he can give you access to his LinkedIn, and you can see that there. There's a joke around that. Okay, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. In a room full of accomplished women, I can count 3 men. So happy to be here as a representative of the male species. Genuinely happy at the opportunity to talk about AIP and at the opportunity to really talk about philanthropy in general and about what we think philanthropy can do for India's transformation. AIP as an organization has been there for about 2 years now, and as our name suggests, our task really is to evangelize for philanthropy, for personal philanthropy. As distinct from CSR and or institutional money, this is all about personal and family philanthropy. Why philanthropy? All of you actually are involved in philanthropy already. There was a pre-survey which some of you were kind enough to fill. 65% of you are already doing some philanthropy or the other. Almost more than 50% of you are part of giving collectives. Many of you are interested, right, in education, in healthcare, and some of you in other sectors as well. So is philanthropy new to you? It's not. We are here to talk about what more can you do with your philanthropy and how we can help in that particular process. You look at what has happened in India, all of this is known to you, right? So I'm not going to repeat this. India has come a long way, but a lot still needs to be done, right? Whether you look at the maternal and child health outcomes, whether you look at poverty alleviation, whether you look at pollution, whether you look at many of these aspects. A lot of you are working with pollution and with climate change as well. Your core areas of interest, as per that survey that we did earlier, is really in education and healthcare, but there are other areas that need attention as well, right? So that's, we've come a long way, a lot more can be done. The key piece is here, right? Why now? Why are we talking about philanthropy now? A lot of money has been made in this country, and at an accelerating pace. There was a report just this morning which talked about the fact that in the next 5 years, the number of millionaires in this country is going to become 1.6 million millionaires. It's double the pace of China or the US. The US will add 5% millionaires. We will add close to 200% millionaires, right, over the next 5 years or so. What does that show? It shows that people are making a lot of money, and half of the UHNIs are actually optimistic about the fact that their wealth will grow even more. So money to be made, money being made, lots of problems being there as well. This clicker and I are not friends. All of you have represented giving. All of you are giving today in many ways, in your own ways. And India, of course, has had a very rich history of giving, right? So if you, there is actually a story which says that Dadabhai Naoroji, if you look at his giving, and if you do that in today's dollars, right, or in today's rupees, he actually is the world's largest philanthropist. And he's given more than any of the big names that we know about today or that we hear about today, right? More than the Rockefellers of this world, more than the Gates of this world, more than many of them. So that's the power of philanthropy that's there. There are so many institutions today in this country that bear his name and that bear testimony to the power of philanthropy done right. This is an interesting chart. It really talks about the fact that it talks about the extent of giving in India, and it compares that with the extent of giving in many other parts of the world. Now, if you look at the US, it says 6% in that particular wealth category of 1 to 10,000 crore wealth category, just about under $1 billion worth of wealth, right, in terms of assets. 6% giving is really what's there. You look at the 50,000 crore plus bracket, which is the ultra rich, the ultra wealthy segment, 1.37%. Look at the India number, 0.06%. Now, if we were to match the US levels, we will unlock $9 billion of extra money in terms of philanthropic capital being made available, right? So that's the kind of power of philanthropy that can actually happen. So therefore, what can this money do and why now? If you really look at it, there is a lot of money being spent on social sectors, right? So government spends lakhs of crores. $9 billion, even if the entire thing were to get unlocked, is a drop in the ocean, right? But philanthropy, especially personal philanthropy, can do what no other pool of capital can do to solve problems. The government money and CSR and institutional money is accountable money in the sense that it's accountable for clear, visible, measurable outcomes. It talks about how many meals have you served. It talks about how many textbooks have you sponsored. It talks about how many schools have you built. It talks about how many toilets have you built, right? That's what's called programmatic giving. CSR money is bound to give the biggest chunk of their giving in terms of programmatic giving because it's accountable money. Government is very, very similar. They are not willing to really sponsor riskier ideas. They are not really willing to sponsor pilots. They are not willing to really sponsor capability building for organizations. They are not really willing to sponsor systemic change. So this is the kind of problems which personal philanthropic money, this $9 billion that we talked about, and many, many more perhaps, that can help solve. So that's really one of the things that one can do. And there are huge examples. I mean, there are two people from this list who are here. All of us are fortunate to have them on the panel here. We have Manisha here from the TCF. So there are many examples of people who have actually invested their personal capital and tried to solve some of these problems, tried to engage with these problems, tried to solve some of these problems. So therefore, what holds people back, right? If you really look at it that way, there are three basic buckets would encourage you to think about what's holding you back. Now, when you look at motivational, cultural, or structural problems are the nuts and bolts problems. This is really, the why is giving so hard in this country? That kind of problem, right? These can be got around. The cultural pieces really, in terms of no public badge for philanthropy, for example, right? Other pieces, for example, preserve wealth for future generations. But the fact that all of you from YFlow are here is a huge tick in that particular box, right? This is no longer a barrier, because if you all weren't interested in philanthropy and if you all wanted to preserve wealth for yourself, you wouldn't be here today, right? So therefore, at least that particular piece doesn't exist for this group. So therefore, is it really the motivational piece, the why now, right? That question would love for you to grapple with yourself in your mind to understand what's holding you back in terms of barriers to additional giving, more giving, or better giving. AIP's task really, and our whole mission in some sense, is all about encouraging people to give more, give sooner, and give better. More, if you're already giving, idea of course is how can you give more? Sooner, because we talked about a cultural piece, right? We talked about a motivational barrier as well, which says that I shall preserve wealth for future generations and I shall give what I can when I'm 80, right? Or when I'm 85. Idea is to ask yourself, why wait? The problems are today's problems. The solutions need to be found today. The solutions need to be funded today, right? Not one generation later. If you do that, it's one more generation lost. So therefore, give sooner, right? And the third, of course, is give better. If you're already giving to programs, how can you give to capability building? If you're already giving to capability building, how can you fund systemic change, right? So those are because this is all expanding ripples of influence. A programmatic funding solves a small problem here and now. Capability building solves a larger problem in the longer term. Systemic change solves a much larger problem. Maybe takes much longer as well, right? But somebody has to make a start. Our theory of change, I learned after I joined this sector. I joined this sector after 35 years of corporate life. So I learned that strategy is called theory of change in this part of the world, right? So our core theory of change really is what? It's just 3 insights. Philanthropy can make a difference, and we've just made a case for that. Philanthropists want to make a difference. If you all didn't want to make a difference, you wouldn't be in this room, right? So philanthropists want to make a difference. And the third insight is that philanthropists are best at inspiring other philanthropists. I can scream from the pulpits, I can preach from the pulpits, it's not going to make much of a difference. Hopefully some difference, not much of a difference, right? But the minute another philanthropist stands up and speaks, you will listen. There was an example right in the room, in the pre-function area when we were talking, right? And, Radha said, yes, I know, AIP has been speaking with me. And then Karishma spoke about it with so much of passion, and Radha says, hey, come see me, right? Now, that's an immediate thing. The credibility of a Karishma standing up and talking about AIP is so much more than AIP talking about itself. That's why we say that AIP really is a network of philanthropists by philanthropists. It's your network. And as when we come to the end of it, I would really urge you to think of it like your network, to think of us as your resources in terms of how we can help you. So those 3 pieces, and then that sort of led us to the house, the nuts and bolts. The nuts and bolts are very, very simple. We will create convening platforms where philanthropists can come, talk to each other, share each other's stories, get inspired by each other, right? We will create knowledge products. So we'll help you with knowledge products and what you need to do the nuts and bolts of your philanthropy. And the third piece is that we work very closely with each one of you to design your giving plans, right? So again, this is a very high-touch model in terms of what we do with you. And by the way, the good news is that all of your money, your philanthropic capital can be directed towards philanthropy. You don't need to pay us anything. We are pro bono, it's free. Right? So it's a high-touch model. The entire advisory, the entire consultancy, the entire knowledge products, everything is done pro bono. We don't ask for the money ourselves. No money gets routed through AIP. All your philanthropy happens directly between you and the organizations that you choose to support. We just help, right? So that's really how we make a change. This is something more in terms of the nuts and bolts of how we help you do it, by helping you build perspective, purpose, helping you build a portfolio. The portfolio idea about philanthropy is an interesting one. All of you have financial portfolios, right? Financial portfolios are all about how can we have some riskier assets, right? Higher return. How can we have some less risky assets, lower return perhaps? How can we have assets that ensure liquidity? How can we have assets that preserve wealth, right? All of those. Think about philanthropic portfolios as well in the same light. Some money for spontaneous philanthropy, some money for programmatic philanthropy, some money for capability building, a lot of money, hopefully, for systemic change, right? Longer term horizons. Think about I'm interested in education, but your daughter is interested in healthcare. So within your portfolio, how do you have different areas that you also fund, right? So there are various ways in which you can construct a portfolio. Exactly the way you have a financial portfolio, think of having a philanthropic portfolio. That really sort of brings me to the end of this piece, right? All of you are already engaged in philanthropy. All of you do a lot of philanthropy. Think of how can you do more of it, right? If you're already doing more, if you're already doing a lot, think how you can make it more meaningful. By that, I mean, how can you make it more systemic? How can you get involved more? Is this just, more writing checks? And they are good, by the way, keep them coming. But if it's not just that, right, how can you give your time and your intellect, which is what this world needs, which is what philanthropy needs, make it more meaningful, right? So that's really the piece, and we can help. Later, if you all want to connect, happy to do that. Happy to be a part of your journey to make philanthropy more meaningful and to help it make a difference to today's problems and to today's challenges in India's transformation. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks a lot, Amitabh. I mean, that really did set the context for this panel, and I'm super excited to have all of you now witness the panel that we have. Can I invite Arnav, Kapur, please? All the panelists, actually, Karishma, Arnav, Radha, all of you.
So very good evening, and thank you so much for being a part of today. This is an incredibly illustrious panel, and thank you so much for flying down just for this conversation. So as with all our events, we'd like to keep this as interactive as possible. So it doesn't matter if you're sitting at the back of the row, I will call on you. So just to take a step back, when I started this year at YFlow, the theme that I chose was Because She Can. It is something that resonates very strongly with me. I genuinely believe that women are a seed of power. There is absolutely, and nothing to take away from the men. I always say she has her he. So my 3 boys in the room, I include you when I speak. But I genuinely believe that women in them have a seed of power. It's empowerment, and there's nothing that we can't do, that we put our minds to. And it's not about what we have to do, what we should do, but what we can do and what we want to do. And this conversation, again, this is a conversation me and Yashodhara have been speaking about for a while. Me and Radhika have been ideating on the work that AIP has been doing for the past year. And really, I just wanted a conversation that makes you think that you can. If you're thinking about giving back, if you're thinking about philanthropy, then it's not something that you need to start 10, 20, 30 years from now. It doesn't have to be something that you follow in the footsteps of your parents, grandparents, which you can and you should. Not should, which you can. But I mean, it's just the idea to open up our minds to the idea of what we can and we can't do. So really looking forward to this conversation. And we're going to keep this fluid. I'm going to request the panelists to jump in, be as frank as possible, as brass tacks, and just have a great conversation and inspire us with the amazing work that you guys are doing. So without further ado, I think my first question to the panel is just an opening question. But I think we come from the land of Gandhi, where we always believe in going back. We always believe, I mean, as growing up as children, we've seen our parents contribute, whether it's to a temple or whether it's to an educational institute. Giving is in our blood. At the same time, India is the startup nation. There's immense economic growth. And what I want to ask you is, what is your personal motivation for having chosen philanthropy? And what has guided you? Has it been someone in your family, or just what has your journey been to have started this? And I will start this with you, Karishma.
Sure, thanks. Thanks again for having us. No, personally, I'll be very short so we all have time, but it was my grandfather, generally. He had made a vow when he was very young that at the age of 70, he will retire and then he'll dedicate his life only to philanthropy. In hindsight, I think it was not a great decision. He should have started much earlier because a lot of the intellectual power, I think what Amitabh was saying, could have been used in a very effective way to solve real world problems, apart from, I think, building his business. And I think generally being from a very Jain, very humble type of family, we used to have very, very basic stuff in the house. there's a lot of guilt, I feel, as a young person, you're born into this lottery of, wealth, which you didn't deserve, at all. So, and you're seeing around you, like I think Bombay, Delhi, like we see, so a lot of that guilt, I think, feels like you need to do something about the problems that you see, because you've been given so much, in both in terms of resources, wealth, but also especially in terms of networks and the intellect to actually plan at a larger scale and think from systems level with the education setup that we have. I feel like it's the least we can do. So,
is it possible to be both economic and social at the same time? Is it possible to build both out? And what is your experience in that?
I think you should. In fact, it's not possible. It should be a priority. That a lot of what you learn from business reflects on how well you can make philanthropy better. And a lot of philanthropy makes you so empathetic that you actually become a better businessman. So both are important, and both should happen simultaneously.
So my journey was really organic. I don't think I'd really planned to be consciously pursuing a career in philanthropy. I've been driven by giving all my life. Like when I was younger, I used to volunteer at an NGO called Akanksha. And then I studied in the US and was in Philadelphia, where I used to mentor kids in West Philadelphia. So I think I always drew joy from giving. When I came back, I consider myself to be privileged, where I could actually pursue my passion. I was empowered with a good education. I had access to capital, which I think is a huge, bit where, I could pursue a dream or could pursue what I really enjoy doing. And also access to networks, because I think being part of RPG group, I had access to a lot of smart people, access to government resources. So I think all of that together leveraged, I think I got to where I am today.
And what was that first step of,
So
you come in and,
yeah.
hey, I'm back from college, how do I start?
Yeah.
Right?
No, actually that's, so we, in Bombay, there's an area called Worli, and our head office is located there. So I remember when I started off, I just went around. Education was something that I was really passionate about, and I know everyone here is too. So I said, okay, I want to do something in education. And my first step was to go around the schools in that area. There were a lot of government low-income schools that I went to, and just asked them, hey, what's your biggest problem? And at that time, English education was a huge problem there, because English was something that people saw as driving upward mobility, but they weren't getting that in school. In fact, at that period of time, there was a huge exodus of people leaving government schools and joining private schools to learn English. And that gave rise to a whole scam where there were these sham schools that were, there was, if people who know about it know that RTE, the right to education, actually came into power then, because the government was countering this particular problem. And they gave free midday meals and food to drive kids back into the public sector to counter this whole scam that was happening. So English was a huge requirement, and the problem was English teachers. They just didn't have English-speaking teachers. So I had a building full of employees who were fluent in English. My first thought was, why can't I just tell them to walk across the street and read a story in English? So it started with a simple volunteer initiative, and then of course it scaled up into a proper program, and today we're training all the teachers in Bombay City through that program. But the impetus was as simple as, let's solve a problem in a small way. But then, like I said, leveraging the networks and the funding and all of that kind of helped the growth.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. And really, I think that's the story that I needed to hear, that you can't build the ocean. You just have to collect, a drop, and then just start with whatever is accessible to you.
So I'll try and answer it in a couple of ways. And I think a common theme for all of us will be what we've seen almost as a value in our family or in the society we live, right? Divya, like you said, we are the land of Gandhi, or whether we've seen our grandparents give money to religious causes, or at least growing up, I saw my parents write checks to Dipalaya, Cry, and Helpage. For people from that generation, they were one of the early adopters of retail giving. And also historically, how have townships emerged in India? And many of you represent those families where when you all or your forefathers set up manufacturing plants, the neighborhood area was developed around that, right? A township emerged around a factory. Could start with a temple, there'd be a school, there'd be a hospital, there'd be something for women. India has always had a very strong giving culture. And I think it's just it's virtually impossible to not get inspired by that to not see it very visible. And I think that's true for me also. I think the second part is also acknowledging the privilege that we are all born into. Life, while we all aspire to look at life in absolute terms, we do end up looking at it at relative terms. And just by virtue of the fact that we are sitting in a Discover Club in the Ashoka Hotel, in Lutyens, Delhi, tells us that we represent the cream of the society. I think for me, the personal motivation is blessed to have won the ovarian lottery. I think I realized the value of an ovarian lottery when I saw the overprivileged, entitled lives my children are living, for no fault of theirs, by the way. I'm the one who's chosen to send them to a school where the bus has to be air-conditioned, it should follow IGCSE curriculum, and I'll come home and crib about teachers aren't good enough, and there are a few fellow parents in the gap. But you know what I mean, right? Like, I think to me, at least at a very personal level, the reality of the ovarian lottery hits you home stronger when we see the divide on an everyday basis, but what we are seeking to achieve for our children, which is only but natural, right? Nobody is more fierce than a mother. And you realize how stark that dichotomy is. I think for me, the personal motivation is, I think it's my responsibility in my own small way to leave the world a little better than I was born into. And I think that's what inspires me. I'll be honest, I don't represent a family with intergenerational wealth. The wealth we are building is what we are building in our lifetime, my husband and I. So for me, the most tangible way of starting the philanthropic journey, other than the couple of initiatives we started supporting, was to make a full-time career switch. So I'm a management graduate, did a corporate career, moved full-time to a philanthropic role. I run an education NGO in 2012. That's been my journey.
Thanks for having me. It's always great to be in a panel discussing with so many successful and impactful women. So I'm blessed that I'm of the three in this room today. I think personally, just echoing what Shaveta said, I'll say a few things. I used to work in management consulting before, and you're trying to solve problems, I think, for the affluent India, in some ways for them to make more money. You're not actually solving the real problems on the street, and which are difficult to solve. There is about half of India, about 500 million people, actually the income is about 1,000 USD. So how can you actually improve their per capita income for the country to grow? So the one thing which really drives me is that India should become a developed economy before 2047. That's the goal we've outlined. And I think if we can make that happen in the next 10 years and actually double that speed is the key driver. I think second, important thing was from a personal perspective, like, Shaveta, we're also building our wealth in some ways as we are going. We're blessed to have born into families where education was prioritized, where you didn't have to fight for the basic needs. About half of the country in some ways is not covered through basic health, basic education, livelihoods. If you'll go like 2 hours from Jharkhand into a village called Lohargada, you'll see the women, if you speak with them, their income for an year is about 30,000 rupees. I think most people make that in a day or even in an hour in this room, I would say. I think just the kind of inequity we have, though like Amitabh said, the country is progressing and the fruits of that progress are being not equally distributed. So how can we actually uplift what I call the aspiring India? So you have the affluent India, you have the middle India, but it's the aspiring India which really needs to progress for the country to really grow. So that is a personal driver. And I think the Gates Foundation provides that platform in some ways, at least personally to me, and why I made that switch. Our vision is that everyone deserves a chance to live a healthy and productive life. And getting a chance to work with 3 trustees, Bill, Melinda, and Warren, I think has been an experience of a lifetime. And then partnering with with individuals in the room and also with others, I think collaboration is something that we've really gone after. We collaborate with government, we collaborate with other philanthropies, we collaborate with CSF, we collaborate with governments, private sector to make progress. So in a way, I think it's been very fulfilling to live that vision and to live that journey.
Thank you so much. And Arnav, there's a point that you said that was very interesting is collaboration. And I think that's very important in philanthropy is how can we collaborate together to scale up what we're doing. And I think that's often a place where we don't, we're obviously not talking about it enough. But we'll come to that. But I think one of the things that we all face with and we all deal with is at some point we are blessed and maybe not so blessed that India is actually a country where you can do so much. Amitabh pointed that in his first slide, but there's literally multiple fields that you can give back, and everyone direly needs your time, attention, and money. So my question to you is, how do you make that choice? Is that choice something that is emotional? Is it gut feeling? And this is for Arnav and Shweta. Are there data models that can help you? Is there a systemic way you can choose that this is the cause I want to be involved with, and this is the way I'm deciding to give my time, attention, and money to different causes?
Sure, I can go. So there's a lot of causes, right? Like, I mean, you can literally, choose anything, and there's problems in that particular cause. So maybe what I've done actually in my journey is start with a cause, but something that but rather than the cause, I think what's important is to focus on the problem that you want to solve. Rather than saying, okay, I'm going to be in education and I'm going to fund 10 NGOs in the education space. It's going back to the entire kind of systems thinking process, is figure out what is the specific problem that you can solve. And then do a lot of research. I mean, I did maybe like 3 years of research. I did a master's in education just because I wanted to know what am I doing and what is the ecosystem like? Why are things not working? I mean, we had a discussion that there are so many NGOs in the education sector. It's an overcrowded space, but still nothing has moved, right? After all of this work, and everyone is trying their own way, but why is the needle not shifting? So I think, it's nice to sign checks and give some money, etc. A better way would be to say that, listen, I'm going to pick out this problem and I'm going to solve it in my lifetime. And I think if everyone did that, we solved one specific problem to its fullest, it would be like transformational, I think. And the way that I would sort of work with that is when I started on this education space.
Sorry, I'm going to stop you for a second. I'd love for you to just elaborate very quickly on
what I'm saying,
what you're doing, and
so
the Shiksha Academy.
For me personally, I think the big problem that I want to solve is that the problem of access to education is getting solved now with the RTE and the government efforts, and the NGOs are working really hard on this. The problem is now become quality, right? So you can say that when will a child from a village catch up to a child in the city if the village is only going to be focused on foundational literacy, numeracy, and the city is learning like critical thinking, like the child in the city is learning critical thinking skills and skill development and exploration. So the problem fundamentally for me is that why can't we have a scalable system that is high quality across? So it's a very big problem. There's a lot of challenges, but it's a systems issue. So we actually drew out a whole systems map, plotting on the map every single factor that is preventing this problem from actually getting solved. And then, so you have this entire spectrum as a systems map of the various factors. And then I plotted a lot of NGOs on these particular factors, that these NGOs are working on this factor, these NGOs are working on this factor, these NGOs are working on this factor, right? And then you see that there are some factors that are empty, and they are the bottlenecks. Actually, they are the ones where you need to really be like systems driven and think that, okay, if I press this button, this button simultaneously, I can create that particular change, because this is what is holding back the system. And for that, you have to collaborate, to your point, right? So you say, I'll work on this because I can take risks. As a philanthropist, my money is risk capital. I'm going to try things that no one else is going to try because no one else is going to fund it. The government won't fund it. CSR won't fund it. No one else is going to fund it. So let me try something different, but also collaborate with all of these other players in a meaningful way to shift the system, as opposed to just, funding an NGO. If that makes sense.
Lovely. And I'm so inspired. I feel like I'm talking to a business strategist, and this is not about philanthropy. And raise your hands who agree with me. But
actually, the skills we do in business are exactly transferable to the sector. So we should use that. Sorry.
And like you said, that there's not much shift happening, even though so many NGOs are working in the same space.
Absolutely.
And you talked about scalability, you talk about scalability. And how can these individual NGOs who are working in such small scales actually create that scalability and sustainability? Because there's so many players in the space, like you had mentioned, but how can one system change in a scalable model?
I don't know how you want to answer this question.
Yeah.
We all have a...
Shweta, do you want to go first? Maybe I think she has a good perspective on this.
Listen, I have a great panel. I'm just going to let you guys do all the work.
And I have a flight, but let me take a stab. and I'm not being provocative for the sake of it, but we genuinely have to stop thinking of world in a binary way.
Yes, that's
there's business and there's philanthropy. That's like I saying I have a personal life, I have a professional life. When I go home, I don't think about work. When I am work, I stop being a parent. How's that possible? And I genuinely believe every aspect of life feeds and makes us a more complete, human being or professional. And I mean, also the NGO space, and I'm not using the word philanthropy, I'm using the NGO space. Let's be honest. For a long time, we've had the image of, Khadi wala, Kolhapuri chappal, sari, jantar mantar pe demonstration. We are boxing the sector. Anything which, I mean, if the sector is solving on problems which historically haven't been solved in the last 75 years of independence, how can that only be hard, right? If the most irretractable problems need our best minds, then they need the business acumen as much as they need the emotional connect. So again, right, I'm very conscious that I'm talking to women in a Y-Flow event. Let's not box the sector in, oh, when I'm in business, I'm thinking like that, but because I'm in the development sector, it's all hard. Business grows and thrives because it's head and heart, right? Some of the most successful people are doing stuff that they are passionate about. And they're making money coincidentally, not that they're making money and becoming passionate about. I think the same lends itself to the philanthropic sector. In terms of how to identify what you work in, I would strongly advise pick areas where you feel a very, very deep personal connect. We are all sitting in Delhi. The AQI has been falling rapidly over the last couple of days. It would be silly to say climate doesn't impact us. It impacts all of us. But I'm sure there are 10% of us for whom it hits home harder. For whatever reason, I'm seeing my child suffer from it, or I'm just upset about the fact that I can't enjoy a picnic in Lodi. But I would strongly say, Deva, to your point, right? The unfortunate reality in India is pick any social issue and we need many more solutions. We need many more minds. We need much more funding. But please pick an area that at a very deep personal level resonates with you. That's what will keep you inspired. And that's what will keep you strongly optimistic. The only way to work in philanthropy is to be optimistic. Because the more we look at data, it can be quite depressing. It can be quite, 75 years of independence. We are headed to our Amrit Kal. The rich India keeps getting richer. My balance sheet looks better, but the balance sheet of social outcomes is not looking good. And that inherent optimism will come from an area that you feel deeply committed to. That's one part. The second part is do take a portfolio approach. I know a buzzword within our sector is system reform. And I think that's the spirit of your question also, right? There's incredible effort happening at an individual NGO level. And who is to argue that if I am running a school for 100 children, but I'm truly changing those lives of 100 children in a deep manner, that scale for me at a personal level might not be the scale for Central Square Foundation, where for us, we only work in a state when we are partnering directly with the government, right? So take a portfolio approach, find something that deeply resonates with you. Small is beautiful, but small is not always useful. And at least a part of your time, effort, energy, money should go towards solving solutions in a more institutional manner. Regarding, and I'll take last 30 seconds to talk about this whole collaboration and collective philanthropy. How do small NGOs drive change at a system level? Let's address the elephant in the room. It takes a different DNA to work at scale. It takes a different DNA, it takes a different persistence, it takes a different funding model to be able to persist and live through every state election, every general election, every bureaucratic transfer, every new policy change, and every conflicting priority. While it's aspirational to say I start something small and it's incredible and I want it to scale, that journey for scale requires a different muscle, right? And let's talk business language. A startup requires a different DNA, a different leadership team, a different startup team than when you're going for funding. Once you've got the funding and you have different outcomes to realize, then you start building the leadership muscle accordingly. So again, long way of saying a few things. Do find a deep personal passion connect to what you want to work in. Small is beautiful, but not always useful. Answer it for yourself where you want to go deep, but where you also want to support initiatives which will stick in the system. Where I exit a village, I exit a district, I exit working with the state government, but I know there is something that is staying behind. And let's not divide business and philanthropy. Let's not think head versus heart. the best minds, the best passion, the best commitment needs to come together to be very data driven, very purpose driven, and very solution driven for the sector.
Thank you. That was amazing.
I mean, we just add a couple of points. I think Shaveta covered all my talking points.
Yeah, sorry, I was in a flow.
So,
Add flow.
yeah, not much to add, I would say, but I think a couple of points maybe to underscore. I think head and heart is very critical. Thinking big is very critical. Making audacious big bets versus solving for a small problem. Look at the bigger picture, because I think if you look at the bigger picture, it's only when you have the bigger picture in mind from the beginning. And when you do that in business, you have a big audacious idea that, I'll be X or Y. Why not the same for your philanthropy? Why only apply it to business? And I totally agree. I think this business, finance, and philanthropy are all the same. You can apply skills from finance to NGOs, or you can apply philanthropic learnings back into business in many ways. I think it's also the top-down view and the bottoms-up view. Sometimes you may have a very top-down view to things. I think it's also the bottoms-up view, because the reality on the ground might be very different than what you might imagine. So it's also important to combine that. And I think just one last point I'll close out with is the collaboration point. I think it's easier said than done. It's difficult to walk the talk. I think if we can make it less about I and more about we, I think you'll solve for the issue. It doesn't matter if it's I who have solved it or an X other organization has solved it. If we have solved for it, I think we all take the credit. It doesn't need to come to one person or to the second person. It needs to be taken by all in some way. So if we can get of that mindset where it's not about me and it's about us, I think at the end the country will grow, and it's all about nation building in some ways.
Thank you. And Radha.
I think a lot of the points were already covered. But the kind of approach that I took on with the foundation and the projects that we've seeded through the foundation, we try to, like Karishma did, look at problems in society that are not being addressed currently for whatever reason, and try and find innovative solutions to those problems. The second principle that we use is we leverage our funding partners' strengths, and I think that really worked for us, whether it is locations where we don't have to pay for rent, or M&E where we're asking our funding partners to come in and do M&E for us. And the third thing, which I think answers to your question, we look at scale with government partnerships. And I think that's really critical to get scale. While I definitely agree with you that either you have a lot of funding coming in so that you can then have that muscle to scale at a much larger level, or you use government as your muscle, which is what we took. We said that, here's, I view the government as the largest NGO, because really the government is serving, everyone. So, that's the approach we took. I'll just kind of run through the programs just to kind of illustrate through example. So the first initiative we started in 2008 was in English education. Again, English as a subject is kind of ignored, because Hindi gets a lot of prominence at the central level, and states really push state languages like Bengali and Marathi, and so English doesn't get the importance it deserves. But clearly, English is something which causes a lot of upward mobility, whether it's access to the internet or our legal system, which is run in English. So we devised a program where we were really solving for English education. Kind of like Karishma said, we narrowed down into one particular problem. Our scale meant we expanded into a teacher training program. Again, it was always working with government. They led that expansion with us. And then during COVID, we went digital. So we launched content for Doordarshan, and now we're coming up with a scale program that kind of is hybrid. The second program we launched was in 2018, which is in the heritage space. Again, this is a space that I think is ignored, because as a country, a lot of our government's resources are focused on people, because that's of first priority, and it's not on places. But we have such beautiful heritage sites. So the way we're solving that is not by spending on restoration activities, because they're capital intensive, and we take on one side, but we focus on revival. So we build experiences where people actually understand the stories behind historical sites. whether it's partnering with artists, creating digital applications, various things that actually drive people to understand what the value of the place is, and that leads to preservation. We also drive economical models where the locals actually draw value from people coming in. So we'll hold heritage walks which are conducted by the locals. So they have a vested interest to actually keep the place clean and preserve the site. The third initiative, which is our latest COVID baby, as I call it, is in the organic agriculture space, because again, environment is an issue in all our minds, and organic farming is something which isn't getting the interest that it should, because as a country, we're not only feeding 1 billion people, but we're net agri-exporters, and we're really achieving that by putting a lot of toxins into our soils, which in the long run would lead to famine, because nothing will grow out of that soil. But then most governments are thinking in 4-year terms, and that's a long-term problem. So it's something that's again ignored. So we, nurse farmers. We've been nursing 500 farmers for the last 3 years, and this endeavor we want to make into a social enterprise, because again, I have a lot of biases again how the funding world works, which we were discussing also a little bit, but there are problems with that. So the goal really is to kind of create a program that's self-funded and feeds itself over time. Because the last thing is women. For us, we don't view women as a vertical, but as a horizontal. So it's really part of everything we do. We have a women-led team. In every program, we really focus on skilling of women. So, that's how we've approached our work, and we've kind of thought of scale as scale with government.
Thank you so much. I think all your answers have been incredibly inspiring. Definitely give me a food of thought. We have a lot of questions in the audience, so I'm going to ask Radha to take it and
I'm going to go
to
Pramiti first, who's been waiting to ask a question.
Sure.
Sorry, I know we are talking individual philanthropy, not necessarily CSR, but given there's so much deep interest in, system and scale, and to Radha's point, just to put it in perspective, all philanthropy combined, individual, CSR, foreign foundations, spend in education is only 3% of what the government spends. The moment you start thinking numbers, you realize how insignificant it is. My sincere request for all of you, when you think of causes you are deeply passionate about, a portfolio of philanthropy you want to give, and I might be countering what Amitabh said as a badge of honor for philanthropists, the route to scale and system is to not look for visibility for yourself. I think one of our biggest learning in collaborating with the government, and Arnav also alluded to it, right? We work in 11 states. If any of you wants me to take you and show you a CSF program, my honest answer is there is none. I can take you to Uttar Pradesh, to a rural district, to a government school, and show you the program the government is running, which we have supported in running. If at a place they give a shout out to CSF, if my logo is mentioned, a team member's name is mentioned, that's a cherry on the top. But if for those of you who will strongly consider a system lens, partnering with the government and thinking system runs counter to visibility for your own brand or your own family name. Just food for thought as you all take a more long-term view on philanthropy. But thanks for allowing that.
Thank you, Shaveta, for making that very important point. I'll turn to Pramiti, who's been waiting to ask a question.
Hi. So, Shaveta, I like what you said when you said that we're the one who put everything in a box like education or NGO. And that leads me to what Radha said about heritage products, the heritage project. So it's interesting that from philanthropy, as you said, like giving it to the chappal wala or the juta wala or the milkman or education, you move to heritage sites. How do you measure something in heritage projects? Like in education, you can be like, a child has reached a certain level or a school has reached. How do you do it for projects which are not in the boxes or don't have a structure for seeing whether it's scalable, or are we doing the right way to bring in scale?
I love this, Radha, we love this. Yeah, I have a very controversial answer to this question, because I'm actually not a fan of M&E reports, and I was mentioning that in the room before, because I think the way the whole funding cycle works is there's a huge dependence on M&E reports. You want these evaluators to come in and evaluate impact. Over my 15 years in this sector, I've worked with many M&E agencies who've come in and evaluated projects. I think the whole relationship is flawed, because I am funding an M&E organization to come and evaluate my project. So there is a funding trail which is just not making sense. Second, I think that I feel that, the people making decisions for funding are typically, board members or people who probably achieved a lot in the financial world or wherever they are, but they are used to, looking at these kind of numbers, M&E, and then saying, okay, money should go here. But really, I would say that it's much more impactful if they just actually went and, experienced the impact for themselves. A lot of things don't get captured in an M&E report, and so we've recently moved into a fundraising, journey with some of our projects, and I see this whole mess that's happening with M&E and how the funders look at it. But with heritage projects, so far, a lot of it is funded from RPG companies, and I always invite people to say, come and experience the impact, because that's just, you see it, you speak to the people there, you see the transformation. So have I got it evaluated? No, but I think I would invite you, Pramati, to come and do a walk and judge for yourself.
Can I interrupt for the last time? Sorry.
That on the data part.
I think this is see again, at the cost of oversimplifying it, impact is important, right? At the end of the day, it's my hard-earned money. I'm deciding how much should I leave for my kids' inheritance, or how much should I spend in my lifetime. Do I need the next holiday home? Do I need the next, XYZ? No, let's get real about these things, right? So I am well within my expectation to see what is this leading to. Now, things even like education have an intrinsic value. Whether or not you can learn what the child has learned in a very quantifiable fact, the fact that the child has a school to go to, she has a peer set, she has teachers, she has a community. Education has an intrinsic value often by itself. What I would again, right, I'll keep going back to, especially as you all are thinking of building out your philanthropic portfolios, think in a portfolio perspective, right? So there will be areas which, because historically have seen a lot of work, have seen a lot of activity. Amitabh spoke about theory of change. You can quantify. There is a final outcome, there are intermediate outcomes, there are outputs, right? The child is not learning, but the child is attending school more regularly. The school is functioning for more days. But there will be newer areas which might not be quantifiable to that level of detail. And even within the evaluation space, right, there are technical terms like mixed methods evaluation. There is a qualitative aspect, there is a quantitative aspect, there's the experiential aspect that Radha is talking about. So again, right, bring all your business lens to philanthropy, but allow it a stage of evolution. Education and health are more mature, and maybe some of the harder questions can be asked there. But when we are looking at even social emotional learning, or when we are looking at things like heritage, or when we are looking at, does all work in gender automatically mean that women are participating in the labor force or earning more? Maybe I'm getting my agency at a rate which is higher than my economic independence. So take a longer term view, acknowledge and accept that every sector is going through an evolution. Ask the hard questions where there are relatable models or reference models. For others, and you guys will have the resources and the bandwidth and the unrestricted funding to solve for those questions.
I think Shaveta mentioned a few, but I think data is very critical, at least from a Gates Foundation perspective. I speak for the foundation because it's Bill's and Melinda's, and Warren's money. And if we don't give them data on what's happening with their money, who are people data driven, I think we're not being accountable to them as funders. In some ways. And we are a very data-driven organization. Data is the core for any evidence, program strategies that we'll create, what kind of scale and scope we'll have. A simple example for marrying business and, philanthropy in some case. So if I'm running an Asian Paints, I'll ask 3 questions when I go into a store. Was the paint available? Was Mera Wala pink available? Will you come again? The same things you can ask, for a doctor, for a person who goes to a clinic. Was the doctor there? Was the medicine there? Will you come again? It is difficult sometimes to boil, to a very single one numerical indicator, which is probably the best thing to do if you can. In education, learning outcome is one. In women, one can look at labor force participation. In sanitation, one can look at fecal sludge treatment rate. So if we're able to boil it to one, I think it makes it much more easier and also helps to get everyone on board. This is the one indicator we are looking for. Now, not in every case it's easy. It's a quant and a call thing. It's a head and heart thing. You have to figure out, but I think data is important. It's not the only thing, but it's very critical when you make a decision, at least from our perspective.
No, I didn't mean to undermine data.
No.
Saying that in some cases it's not possible to really quantify something, but in education and established, like Shaveta mentioned, in established sectors, clearly
Absolutely.
it's really important.
Say, I think we try to marry both the worlds. In some ways, it's a tricky thing. It's not a straight line, right?
No, but just acknowledging that it's complicated.
Yeah, it's not straightforward.
In a country like India, where more than 95% of the social sector spending is done by the government, can philanthropy really play a catalytic role?
Yes.
Categorically, yes. And can I ask you to elaborate a bit, because sometimes there's a bit of doubt in that.
I think it goes back to what I was saying earlier, is about taking risks, right? So the government's not going to be able to take risks. It's not going to be able to create models. This goes back to the assessment question you guys were discussing. Figuring out an appropriate assessment is a problem, right? Like, we acknowledge that, there is disagreements on this panel about how to assess something. So think of it as a problem that needs to be solved, right? Like, we need to figure out, okay, what's a good assessment model for health? What's a good assessment model for education that is not a 10th board exam? Because that is what everything in education is judged on, which is completely the wrong assessment, right? What is it for heritage, right? So each of these needs to define a particular model of assessment that captures all of the quantitative and qualitative data in a specific way that actually results in something. So there are all of these challenges. Now, like a college or a kind of university can do this. So fund a college to do this kind of research. Once you have that, imagine the impact on NGOs once you have an assessment model for a sector. Just one example, right? So this requires a very small funding with a great idea and a need in the market that, oh, this is missing. Let's go and fund this particular project that will help catalyze this entire sector better. So stuff like that can be done.
I think also, just to add, I think government funding has a lot of restrictions, which we all know with the way there are systemic issues. If we are feeling there are systemic issues within our sector, government multiplies that by 10. So, having that flexibility to spend in areas that government can't. And we work very closely with government in Maharashtra, and sometimes they come back saying, we want to do this. This is the kind of money we are going to get. For these things, like for heritage spaces, they're not going to get money for art. They're not going to get money for the stuff that we are doing, heritage walks. So we strategically, when we come into a partnership, all our infrastructure spends is actually government money. So we're putting it on all the things that they can't spend on, because they have mandates from the center to spend only on, it's very limited the way they can spend. So working in collaboration and actually filling those gaps, saying that, okay, we leverage, this is what you can do, this is what we can do, let's work together and multiply that. So that private funding has that room to do that.
Thank you.
Just one point to add. She put it very eloquently. I think 95% of the government spend actually goes for like non-planned expenditure, so salaries, interest payment, debt obligations. So it takes away the kind of innovation that one can bring in.
Thank you. Radha has another question for us.
We have traditionally seen that models of giving pure money and subsidy actually fail to generate the kind of returns that one would anticipate in such a scenario. So in a space like this, and with so many of us who are sitting at the helm of business and philanthropy, where deriving value is something which we would traditionally also understand, how would you suggest we can balance deriving value vis-a-vis impact, and what kind of models can we work towards in achieving such a goal?
Sure.
I think social enterprise is the way forward. Honestly, I think everything should move to social enterprise. I'm a big proponent of it. So, of course, my husband's on the business side and I'm on the social work side. I keep saying that these two need to come to the center. I said both of us need to just be in the center. Business needs to move this side, I need to move this side. And honestly, because I think from the business side, I think the future is all about that. People are conscious now where their clothes are coming from, where their food is coming from, what kind of even diamonds and people buy are conscious of where did this diamond come from. So I think people are becoming more conscious of the footprint on the business side, consumers, and it's only going more and more in that direction. And on the philanthropy side, again, I talked about how funding, I think, is really flawed in the way funding comes in. And I think that if we can get NGOs to build products that actually can be sold, whatever your product is, you're actually moving towards excellence. because you're saying that would somebody actually pay for this? Then, and you become self-sustaining. So, I mean, that's really a dream project for me now. Let's see if it works out. It's still at its nascent stage. But if I can draw value out of something that is actually doing good, then you're building a funding model that's self-sustaining, and you don't need to put in more funds.
Such models, right? Like, how do you balance out this whole? Like, you spoke so much about choosing an area where you're passionate, deriving value, also impact, but also,
I think you should. Passion is the number one.
How do you create a balance between this, and how do you choose?
I can try.
Why don't you try?
Go ahead.
Just so this is like a question that has been plaguing me as well. I mean, because you want to make it self-sustainable. One of the ways is social businesses, but unfortunately, not everything can become a business, right? And that is the reality of the situation. Doesn't mean that you don't do it, because who else is going to do it? I feel. But at the same time, looking at a kind of perspective from a systems lens, right? You have this problem. You have 30 factors why this problem exists. Some of these factors are businessable, and some are not. So you do both, right? You do, this is going to lead to a profit. I'll use this to fund this, but I'll do both. So exactly, but you have to understand the landscape first and see, okay, identify that this, if I do, like the typical kind of like Devi Shetty model, Narendra, that the rich patients fund the poor patients, etc. There are these models that exist, but we need to do a lot more research to figure out what are those interconnections between these various factors that we can capitalize on and extract value from.
I'll just make 2 points, and especially on the value part, right? So let me start with impact investing. For impact investing to work, we need data and numbers. Impact investing doesn't work without numbers, right? I mean, EBITDA, PAT is the world that most of you are probably more familiar with than I am. So impact investing needs data. Now, every sector is going through an evolution. Some sectors will lend themselves to that data more sharply. I'd say health and education is there, climate unlikely. I mean, even on the governance side, I'm sure you're all sitting on boards where there's whole conversation on ESG, right? We were just learning to define diversity and inclusion. The new acronym now is diversity, equity, inclusion, and belongingness. Good luck measuring belongingness to all of us. No, let's get real, right? So there are areas where, because there's data, we can think in terms of impact investing. In terms of values, and at the cost of, not completely agreeing with Radha on this, the moment we start deriving value, at least the way in our work we define, there's India 1, India 2, India 3. Let's be honest, if this is the creme de la creme of India 1, we don't even necessarily need India to solve for our problems, right? I mean, not proud of it. I was going through a health issue with my daughter, and our friends recommended reach out to Mayo in the US, and you know what we did? Again, right? Because that's what access allows you to do. And again, I'm going back to no one's more fierce than a mother, and we did what we needed to do. But I was very conscious of the fact that, we took the decision that Kokila Ambani Hospital is not cool enough until we reach Mayo, right? So India 1 solves for itself because we have the power of resources. Value comes from India 2, not from India 3. The bottom of the pyramid, and I think Yashodhara or Divya referred to the whole C.K. Prahlad articulation of bottom of the pyramid. The reality of India, even in its Amrit Kal, is bottom of the pyramid cannot pay. So again, I'll keep going back to a portfolio approach. Please look at impact investing. Please look at value base. But know that to truly solve a problem for the people most in need, they will never have the paying potential. The models that we then offer are freemium models, right? I get a dumbed down model, but for anything which can truly make a difference, whether in my education or in my child's vocational skilling, is a paid model. And it automatically goes to, we can call it lower middle class, but that's still India too. So personally, I think that deriving value out of social purpose products, we are still at very early stages. But to begin with, let's at least start quantifying the impact to move towards impact investing.
Thank you so much. We'll take one last question from Avantika before we wrap up.
So how would you customize your approach while engaging with different stakeholders like a private, government, or an NGO? And also another thing that both of you, do you mostly support government programs? That's my
We only work with the government as CSF.
Okay.
We only work with the government. We've worked on so again, just let me put numbers. 50% of young children in India go to private schools. We are the only country where parents with the most limited means say no to negative cost of government education. Again, right, I'm putting data because it just, if I was a low income parent in Maharashtra and I sent my kid to school, I'd get 37 perks. Very crude way of saying I could make money by sending my child to school. That's how many perks I get. These are the parents, Avantika, with most limited means saying government education is not good enough. Education is aspirational. They're sending their kids to private schools. Unfortunately, private schools is a very, very fragmented market. There's no degree of aggregation, right? You're talking to a private school owner as a unit of one. So at least all our work is with the government, and government both as a regulator as well as a service provider of education.
Arnav,
Do you?
Yeah, I mean, couple of points to add. I think one, a large part of our, if not all, is with the government. Going back to the question, I think of scale, I think we look at three levels or three platforms for scale. So one is government, because for basic health education, government is the key enabler to have scale. For certain areas like agriculture, women's economic empowerment, private sector can play a huge role in that. So in agriculture, like you can get FPOs, you can get proper businesses coming out of it, not for every other work. And then we work with communities, self-help groups, because India is the largest self-help group platform. About 80 crore women are part of the self-help group. 8 crore women are part of the self-help groups in India. So it's the largest platform actually in India to leverage on and build. So we work with both. In some ways, we also do some impact investing, to the previous question. About roughly at a global level, about 3 to 4% of our spend would only be impact investing, or what we call debt equity or volume guarantee. Large part of it goes in areas where you need the private sector to come in. So we've invested in a few agri startups, health startups, with the hope that they'll go to the aspiring India or India 3, like Shaveta said, hopefully. But we look at both, and also the communities as an angle for scale. And depends on the program, depends on the area, depends on the problem. Government is the biggest of all. So, you'll have to be cognizant of that in some ways.
I just wanted to call in Anupma here, because you're talking about government and we're talking about how can a private help. And I'd love Anu to talk about your Sikho Sikhao initiative, because they've really, Anupma's really talked about how, as a private individual, you can help support government as well as self-help groups. So just a little bit about the initiative.
Thank you, Divya. This came out of the blue.
I told you, all of you are on.
So, I think Radha, I totally connect with your feeling of wanting to give back. I started with a voluntary program with executives' wives in our, factory area, thinking it was an untapped resource. Very passionate about education. Got them to volunteer in schools. And then I went on to the systemic approach, knowing that, this is not sustainable. Giving any input-driven, thing to schools is not something that can be sustained at all. So went on to partner with the government. We work at the grassroots level with government schools in UP. And like you were saying, that top-down and bottom-up approach is very important. I think the bottom-up approach is something which is missing with a lot of NGOs, or they're doing it in a very, very small scale, which cannot really impact the top in a significant manner. So for me, it's really making an impact at the bottom level, taking the actual grassroots experiences to the top, and then creating solutions from there. So connecting both together. And we've had a fabulous experience. I'm very new to the space. I keep learning every day. And we do a lot of work with governance also, because we understand that for education to be accountable, it is only the community that can make education accountable, because the government just has to do what they have to do. They have to get the kids into school. They have to graduate the kids. There is no choice there. The accountability of quality can only come with the interaction of the community, because I think the parents are the biggest stakeholders here. So if we can involve the stakeholders into the game, so that's what I've been doing in a very small way. One district in UP right now, but scaling up, and very interesting work.
Sounds wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry, Radhika. We were talking about last question.
Bring up the distinction, if any, if the panelists kind of consider a difference between philanthropy and CSR.
Yes.
Is one more suited to particular types of...
Perfect. Okay, I think this is a question that all of us are thinking about, Radhika. What is the difference between philanthropy and CSR? What is the difference between philanthropy and charity? Is it all the same lens? And you know, if we want to start, how do you start? What's that one step? So last words from all of you, and Karishma, I'd start with you.
Actually, there should be no difference. Ideally, what is the difference? There should be nothing at all different. The only, I guess, we have a certain accountability to a CSR board, as opposed to when you're doing individual philanthropy, you're accountable to no one. You can do what you want, pretty much. Pros and cons of both, right? It's not necessarily always a good thing to be allowed to do what you want, but from personal experience. but I think if we can treat CSR with the respect that it deserves in a corporate, which means hire a person in the CSR department who can think like the way that you think, right? Like who has that vision, who has that goal, that we're going to solve problems. We have the opportunity, we have the networks with resources. I mean, what a corporate can give you, even an individual philanthropist has to start building on their own, right? So for my school, I had to really like start building HR systems, finance systems, hiring, and then I realized, why am I doing this? I'll just use the corporate guys to help me do this as a volunteer. So there's a lot of benefit like inbuilt. You have a cadre of volunteers in your company that are ready to go, right? They can help out. So there's a lot that CSR can do if it is thought of in a strategic way and given the importance that it deserves in a corporate, which is not often the case.
I'll just make one pointer, and you know, I couldn't have said it better than Karishma said that. Ideally, there should be no difference. But I think two things make a change. A CSR is a part of a corporate. There will be there'll be a fiduciary board, an advisory board, a corporate board. And sometimes decision making can be based on where are we present, how does it speak to our business case. So there will be, let's say business comes into CSR, business does not need to come into philanthropy. And especially currently in the Indian regulatory context, between how hard it's to get foreign funding and everything that MCA wants us to fill for CSR, philanthropic capital, which is personal giving, which you all might consider as UHNIs, is risk capital. It can truly be unrestricted. I like what you're doing. I want you to solve for, just pick any area. I want us to figure out what will it take for AQI to improve in a particular geography in Delhi. It's no questions asked. It's patient capital, it's untied with no restrictions. And I think the degrees of freedom it can give to an NGO, CSR unfortunately due to regulatory reasons cannot. And again, I'll keep going back to a portfolio approach. You cannot deny the fact that your families are actively giving us CSR. But please acknowledge that there are certain restrictions in what that giving can be used for, cannot be used for. It's been hardest in my experience to raise money from CSR to work with the government. I've had some of the biggest houses say, incredible work that you're doing, but it's a family policy to not work with government. Unfortunately, that pretty much becomes an end of a conversation from a Central Square Foundation perspective, right? So while the CSR, also because of your shareholding, is money you're giving to philanthropy, but the risk capital and unrestricted funding, and I think a word, Amitabh used risky, Karishma used the word, to try out something really different, to try out something non-linear, to work in a model of ambiguity is where you need unrestricted funding. And I think that's where philanthropic capital makes a huge difference.
I think the points are covered. I would say regulation is a big one. And even in regulation, I think a lot of times the CSR funding has caps, like you need to spend the money in 1 year or 3 years. I know sometimes I find that very difficult on, because I sit on both sides. And sometimes as an NGO to spend money the right way in that time frame becomes really limiting. So you're literally almost, okay, let's just, buy books for the library because now it's quarter end and you've not met your target, is sometimes decisions that you take, which is unfortunate. But I think it's exactly that, the regulation, but otherwise not really any big difference. I think it's quite broad, the CSR laws. They allow you to do a lot of stuff. Maybe institution building, there is a cap on how much you can spend on institution building. There is a cap on how much you can spend on marketing, which unfortunately sometimes is important. and the time frame. I think these are the three constraints that I would say come with CSR spending, but it's not that much of a difference.
And I think generally we're all very good at capital allocation. That's just how businesses run. So use the same lens. What is the best way to allocate your CSR and private funding that seeks to get that purpose made? So.
Yeah, I mean, I just close by saying, like, I think corporate philanthropy is increasing. It's about $2 billion, increasing at 10-11% with the nominal growth. So it's incredibly important as a lever, whatever in that ambit of constraints that Radha mentioned. If you can allocate that, more efficiently, and allocate it in some ways, for stakeholder returns versus shareholder returns, I think that will lead to maybe longer impact. And I think CSR could be good for business, or philanthropy can be good for business. If the per capita income of the country increases, I think it will be good for the business back in some day or the other. So I don't see much distinction in that. I think just close out by saying philanthropy and charity. I think charity is actually more in a sense of not solving a problem. Yeah. It's like your check writing. In some cases, it's very emotional, different than philanthropy. For philanthropy, you're trying to solve a problem, and then you're looking at a system to solve the problem, applying supply, demand, top down, bottoms up, and all of that, and then looking at it from a larger perspective. I think philanthropy needs to be distinguished from charity in many ways, because sometimes there is a conflation of both, and I don't think it lends itself in a very useful way. So if you can have a wider approach, a bigger picture thinking towards philanthropy, I think will lead to more strategic thinking and more strategic big bet philanthropy in some ways.
Thank you. And I'm going to call on Aradhana to sum up the discussion for today. But before I do that, I will do a shameless plug for a community development work that we've been doing. And we have Rashi here and the community development team. So this is, and I don't know whether to classify this as philanthropy or giving back, but I'm just going to talk about giving back. This is a project that we took up with the Tihar jail last week. So as Flow, at YFlow, we're committed to sort of giving back to the community. And we were doing a skill development project in Tihar jail. They run a candle making unit where they make these regular white candles that are sold in blind school. And of course, with Diwali coming up, it's a big need. But interestingly, what we did is we got some of the designers who design candles for OMA and Good Earth. And we created these designer candles in the shape of statues, hands, and little flowers. And we also got them, and the community development team actually got them the wax as well as the different models that they need to make that. And now Tihar Jail is actually making designer candles that you will actually find in OMA or these other fancy places. And we're actually getting those as gifting for our members at YFlow. And I would encourage, if you have needs for candles, please reach out to the Tihar Jail districts. But again, I feel this is probably an example of giving back using resources and networks that we have in our network to do a little bit more than what might otherwise have been possible through maybe making heritage sites more familiar or making educational institutes more relevant than what is just the basic brass tacks that is otherwise possible through CSR or what the government is trying to do. But thank you so much, and Aradhana, I call on you to give us a little bit of a brief.
Thanks, Divya, and thank you to our wonderful panel. I think the discussion could have gone on if we weren't hard-pressed for time. So I think two of the key points that came out was firstly to find something that you're really passionate about, a problem that you want to solve and really go after it. And second is, of course, the power of collaboration and collectives and, reaching out not just to governments, but to other members in this space and learning together and implementing. So one of the reasons we did this discussion today and is it's a project that we want to keep working on at YFlow. So the idea is that themes that have emerged today, we want to take it up as smaller roundtable discussions in the coming year. So I would encourage all of you to look at QR codes that are all around the room and take the short survey that we've designed where we can capture what your interests are as a philanthropist. And then we can curate these roundtables for you and have deeper dive discussions and maybe create projects which we can all work on together as YFlow community. I would now like to invite Ms. Avarna Jain, our past chair, to please give a token of appreciation for joining us today. Thank you, Shaveta, for being here today and making time for us. To please give a token of appreciation to Radha, Goenka and Arnav Kapur. Thank you, Radha, for joining us today. Thank you, Arnav, for making time for us today. Thank you so much to everybody for joining us. Thank you to Discover, and thank you to our back-end team for making sure the event runs smoothly. Thank you so much, Amitabh, for putting this afternoon together for us.